Great. Thank you very much, Anthony, and good evening, everyone. It's so good to be with you. I'm just going to see if I can share my screen so that we at least get started on the right foot. And it's this one here, I think. Great. Hopefully we can all see that first slide, pastors and politics. Wonderful. So yes, a little bit about me. I almost feel like pastors and politics could well be two of my favorite subjects, all completely by accident. It was never ever my plan to be a pastor, and it certainly was never a plan of mine to end up involved in politics. But well, God guides us and leads us. The plan for my life, if it was according to me, was to be a rock star. And I studied music and was hoping for a career of music. And my wife's a violinist. But God had other plans. I'm a pastor's kid, so I've kind of grown up in church. In fact, I was reflecting this weekend on my first memory of a church service. What was it? And all I can remember was my dad used to work for an organization called the London City Mission. And he had his own mission hall in a place called Hoxton, which is in Hackney, in the East End of London. And we would have been there in the early 80s. And I'm not saying it's the nicest place now, but it certainly wasn't the nicest place then. And I do remember that because it was a mission hall, he wasn't allowed to run Sunday morning services because they weren't a church, but he kind of got around that by doing Sunday evening services instead. And I do just remember those evenings of all the people from the local community just coming and worshipping together. And then politics was an interesting avenue for me too. I guess like you, it's always been of interest. And but my best friend got elected basically to the Welsh Parliament, and I'd helped him with his campaign, mainly because he came under such criticism over some of his Christian views, and so I just thought I'd support him in his campaign, and he won, and which seemed to be quite a big surprise for everyone, and I ended up managing his office, and then stood for election myself in my town and in the county, and was elected. So often found myself asking the Lord what was he doing with my life. And it's funny, lots of my kind of political engagement and the rooms that I found myself in, I feel is where I've probably learned most about leadership, if I'm honest, and how to work with people and how to enjoy conversation, try and see things from different perspectives. But it was always a good space to work in. But then more recently, I've spent most of my time with church stuff and with the Evangelical Alliance. So I'm not an expert on these things, but I do think I've got a few things to say, and I enjoy talking about these things. So perhaps there's something we can all together just take from this evening. So what I'd like to do is just frame the context slightly, kind of the world in which our politics is functioning. Perhaps provide a framework, kind of definition of what politics is, and then look at a little bit of how I think we as church leaders or pastors, people of faith, should engage. And for clarity, I'm not going to be talking about party politics. I'm going to talk about politics with I guess it's a small p. Um, but in terms of the context, we certainly seem to be living in uncertain times. I think there's a lot of openness to the gospel, and there's some great things happening. But the backdrop is certainly uncertainty in the world. I was intrigued by this term perma-crisis, which in 2022 was the Collins Dictionary Word of the Year. It means an extended period of instability and insecurity, especially one resulting from a series of catastrophic events. Um, and from my perspective, it feels like this century has had lots of catastrophic events, and we just seem to lurch from one to the other. I was actually working in a music shop when 9/11 happened, and I remember watching that on our TV in the music shop, and that for me seems to be the first crisis I remember kind of living through or working through. Then there was the financial crash, 2008. But I thought that this sort of term permacrisis does sum up the sort of world we're living in. I wish it didn't. I'm an optimist, but we'll also try and be a realist. So this is the context in which we're talking about faith and politics and churches. A similar term that I've come across is one called polycrisis, um, a term coined by French philosopher Edgar Morin. And what I like about how he talks about crisis is he emphasizes that a crisis is ever really only meant to be a one-off thing. As something comes to a head, comes to a crisis, is dealt with, and then we move on. Um, but because we live in such an interconnected society, we're aware of crises happening everywhere, and it often feels like it's on our doorstep, and it's certainly on our screens, if not on our doorstep. And he makes a really interesting point that because we're so connected, um, a crisis, yes, that crisis somewhere else, very remote from us, with actually no real sense of connection, really does affect us. All I could think of was by things like perhaps I like going on long distance walks, and I did a couple this summer, and my feet really suffered, and I lost a few toenails. It's pretty disgusting, really. Um, but just the fact that my toenail um, was off my foot affected my whole body because we're connected. I'm connected to my toes. And we live in a strange world where we're just randomly connected to things and it affects our our well-being. And I think politics is and politicians, people in authority are just grappling with this. Um, there's complexity. I was talking to someone recently about some policies or some issues in here in the UK, and they were criticizing the government and thought they had the solution. And I said, well, to be honest, if there was a simple solution, the government and successive previous governments would have sorted it out. And there is so much complexity going on in the world, and people are trying to find their footing and seek surety. So that's the backdrop. Permacrisis, polycrisis. So what is politics in the mix? I love Churchill's definition of politics. Politics is the ability to foretell what is going to happen tomorrow, next week, next month, and next year, and to have the ability afterwards to explain why it didn't happen. I think that pretty much sums up a skeptical view. I'm a skeptic at heart. A skeptical view on politics and their ability to actually make change and see things happen. In all my time, though, in working in politics and with politicians, I think everyone I met had good hearts. Doesn't always come across. Got into their work to make a difference for good. And I was always surprised at how Christians, especially, could often talk about the machine, the politics machine, or the media machine. And I guess what people are saying, but these things are people at heart, individuals trying to pay their bills, forging relationships, interpreting the world. And I never really saw much of the machine. I just saw lots of people trying to do their best and work together for the good of society. That's Churchill's definition. There's kind of three things I'd like to look at in terms of how we frame politics. The first is really going right back to the root of what politics is and where the term comes from. It's originates with Aristotle, who had a lot to say about society and constitutions and different types of government. Um, and the root of this word politics is the affairs of cities. Uh, I guess you could say the affairs um, of government, but at its root, it's the affairs of cities. Um, and he viewed the polis, or the people or the city, as a natural entity that arises from human needs and social drives, arguing that humans, as rational beings, have an inherent tendency to form communities. And so, according to Aristotle, the affairs of the city was about helping people live well together, in about security, about provision, about good relationships. And the reason I think this is a really good place to start and think about politics is, and I'll come to this a little bit later on, is sometimes as Christians, I think we can be put off politics, aren't sure whether we should get involved or how do we get involved. But if we can think of it as the affairs of the cities, well, I'm going to suggest that the Bible has a lot to say about cities and our involvement in those cities. In a sense, I think there is a call upon us as people of faith to be involved in the affairs of the cities, um, if that is about helping people live well together. I can certainly acknowledge that politics these days it's a lot more complicated than that. There's always the argument about big government and small government. I think whatever side of the political spectrum that argument's being made, it always seems to be give big government to me. Um, I'm not too sure if our Western type of democracy was what Aristotle envisaged. But it's a really useful definition. I find it quite helpful when I think about how I can help my church or people get involved politically. We're talking about the affairs of cities. I was intrigued this year to hear Pope Leo speak about politics. Um, and he kind of reasserts this idea that politics, I was going to say, is a force for good. It certainly should be a force for good. Um, I guess the problem is that when we as humans get our hands on things, the tendency is to drift away from goodness if we don't have God at the center. Um, but it's interesting that Pope Leo said, if we consider the service that political life renders to society and to the common good, it can truly be seen as an act of Christian love, which is never simply a theory, but always a concrete sign and witness of God's constant concern for the good of our human family. I know certainly when I stood as a counsellor, I was actually the mayor of my small town for a while. Um, this is how I try to frame things. How can we as a group, as a council, how can I as an individual bring about good? Can we be a force for good? I was intrigued that this is something that Pope Leo picked up on. And actually, he was talking a little bit about Thomas More, which brings me on to my third point here, politics, mission, and the kingdom of God. So Thomas More um, is viewed as, certainly within the Catholic tradition, as the patron saint of politicians. Um, Not something that my church tradition is that familiar with. But I like the way that, again, Leo spoke of him. Thomas More was a man faithful to his civic responsibilities, a perfect servant of the state, precisely because of his faith, which led him to view politics not as a profession, but as a mission for the spread of truth and goodness. And lots of Christians that I know who are engaged in politics, um, they see it as their mission field. It's a part of society that needs the influence of the kingdom of God. And I'm definitely someone who thinks that we should be in the room rather than throwing stones from the outside. I think we should be round the tables, meeting with people, talking with people, working, if you like, within the system. And of course, our scriptures are full of people who did just that. Many of our heroes of the faith, found themselves working within ungodly systems, but called to be in that place to speak of the goodness of God. We could think about Joseph, Daniel, Esther, Nehemiah. Uh, the list goes on. In the New Testament, Jesus clearly had things to say about politics. The Apostle Paul could well have been a member of the Sanhedrin, a type of political group of the day. Not just political, I know, but it had a lot to do with the affairs of people. Um, he addressed politicians. There are instances, aren't there, in the New Testament? I can't remember his name now, but Herod's steward is referred to at one point. So it feels like we should be quite used to working within systems that we might not like, um, viewing it as part of our mission, a place to see the kingdom of God come, a place to see the gospel proclaimed. Um, yeah, many of the politicians I know who are Christians, they see it as their mission field. Just like every strata of society, really, needs to see something of God's goodness. So I want to just reflect a little bit more on this idea of the city. Um, I've clicked on a different arrow. I hope you can see the city one. It's got Proverbs 11 at the top. Great. And I'll just pulled out a few verses here that help me frame how I could be involved, or the call upon our lives to be involved in the affairs of the city. So Proverbs 11:10, when the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. When the wicked perish, and there are shouts of joy. The Bible's quite funny sometimes, isn't it? I don't know how whether we should be shouting for joy when the wicked are perishing. But the first bit we'll go with, I'll try not to be too woke. When the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. Something to be said for the people of God actively doing well in their neighborhoods. Has a good effect on the city. Jeremiah 29:7, and we'll be coming back to this verse. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Great sort of definite instructions for certainly the children of Israel to get engaged with their cities, with their place. I thought Matthew 6:10, the Lord's Prayer, is quite pertinent here. The prayer, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I think what I'm trying to demonstrate at this point is we don't just pray it, we also live it. We'd be hypocrites if we prayed one thing and lived in a different way. Our lives should embody our prayers. There should be synergy between the two things. So surely if we're praying, Lord, let your kingdom come, let your will be done, we should also be seeking to see that happen. It's one of the great missionaries, is it C.T. Studd, who talked about how, no, not him, who said, kind of classic phrase, we get on our knees and pray as if it all depends on God, but then kind of get up as if it all depends on us. There's that link between the prayers and action. They should match. And one of my favorite chapters of the Bible, Hebrews chapter 11, speaks of Abraham, verse 10. If he was looking forward, Wesley, thank you. If he was looking forward to the city with foundations whose architect and builder is God. God is building a city. He's interested in the affairs of people. And I wonder if there's something in that sort of sense of destiny and what is to come that should inspire us in terms of the city or the place in which we live now. Almost like there is a kind of a blueprint, there's some restoration going on, and surely we should be seeing glimpses of that eternal future. Do the word eternal and future go together? Should we be seeing glimpses of the eternal in our present? I think we should. I think that's what it means to be given eternal life. So thinking around the city, I think is quite helpful, especially for those of us that are leading congregations, and those that might say, actually, we shouldn't get involved. I always like contemplating thoughts around the separation of church and state. And I think I would agree with that, I think, though, of course, in a UK context, there is there isn't really that much separation in terms of the established church and state. They sort of go hand in hand. It's quite a complicated one to try and talk about. Um, but I'm not advocating a theocracy. I'm not advocating that we should be enforcing religious views on people. I just think that the children of God have got something great to bring to what is our Father's world. So two more slides I'd like just to talk through in terms of how we can practically outwork some of this call in the city. Um, and coming back to Jeremiah 29, verses 5 to 7, where we read in verse 7 about seeking the prosperity, peace and prosperity of the city. I become quite enamored, I suppose, with the idea of being people in exile. I think this is very much I think we can see this from a few different perspectives. Personally, um, I feel like I'm exiled from Eden. One day all things will be restored. And I love it when Jesus spoke to the man, the thief on the cross, that, about paradise and the roots of paradise, of course, that word is Eden, it's the garden. And one day all things will be made new. And I have this deep, deep longing in my heart to see that fulfilled, and looking forward to heaven, basically, and what life means, and framing my life now as exile. No, that doesn't mean escapism or shutting myself off. It's exile in terms of Joseph in Egypt or Daniel in Babylon. So that really helps me personally in terms of outworking my faith. But I think perhaps if we're here and we think about church in the West, I think church in the West is increasingly finding itself in exile. And I think we're having to come to terms with that if we haven't done already. It would appear to me that the church used to be fairly near the middle of society, at the center. The fact that in my little village of 1,000 people where I live, there are two churches would suggest that the church was certainly closer to the middle of people's thinking and society, but no longer is. And how do we navigate that space, basically being the church on the edge? And so I love Jeremiah 29 and the way it is framed as instructions to people in exile. So first thing that Jeremiah encourages the exiled people to do is to build houses and settle down, and not to put up tents and hope to leave soon. He says, well, in that place that you find yourself, build continuously, build houses, settle down. I think we should make plans as Christians and churches to do well in this season, in this place. What can we build in the current context? How can we be involved with the life of the city? The children of Israel were urged to plant gardens and eat what they produce. So plant for sustainability. This sense of long term. There's going to be no quick fixes. There's no silver bullets. Let's see how we can see God's kingdom advance in our time. Where do we plant? How can we plan so that churches remain sustainable in our context? How do we get involved with the city, the town, to help them see that what we're about can add to their sustainability? Verse 6 is fascinating, isn't it? In terms of their kind of laws, their purity laws, marry and have sons and daughters, increase in number there, do not decrease. Am I right in thinking that that is about taking husbands and wives from other cultures? I think it is. I might be wrong. I have to double check that. I should have checked. But there is definitely this sense of connecting with those around us, engage in strategic alliances. Let's work with the people with whom we live, and seek the prosperity of the city. Pray to the Lord for it because it prospers. You too will prosper. What good can we bring as a church to the places where we live? The question I think we all like to ask when we're working out, what's the point of all this? Should we be doing church any differently? If our church disappeared overnight, would our community even notice? Um, are we actually here seeking the good of those around us? So these 4 points I find really helpful when I'm planning for the future, when I'm with the team or thinking about the year or 2 or 3 ahead. Um, these are kind of becoming some of our markers for making plans and getting involved with the world around us. Okay, last one. I wanted to just highlight, I've called this practical filters, everyone. Um, things to consider in a crisis-driven world, trying to work out how we engage, um, how do we view politics, how do we get involved. I think as a pastor, I'm always encouraging people to get involved with um, many forms of politics, places where people are making decisions in a group context, whether that's governance in a school, local charities and committees, local government. I don't think we should shy away from these places. I think we should be seeking the peace and prosperity of the city by bringing what we bring into those contexts. And I was at an event recently, and a young guy came up to me. I think he's the president of a Christian union somewhere now. Um, Actually, no, he works for UCCF. And he asked if I remembered him. I said nope. And apparently, I'd given a talk at a Word Alive event on Christians and politics. Must be 10 years ago. And he said one of the things that he remembers is me saying, it doesn't matter what your politics are, just get involved in politics. We need Christians in all parties. And actually, I still believe that. I think that we as pastors should also be encouraging Christians to get involved in party politics, because ultimately that is the vehicle that decision making is delivered in most of our countries. Anyway, that's an aside. What's some filters? Um, what sort of posture? I keep getting asked recently, what's our position on this? What's our position on that? I tend to prefer to talk about posture, um, that we should be humble, that we should be kind, because actually I think we should be seeking. I've used this word consolation. I think we should be seeking unity. We live in very divisive times, polarizing times, where politics is very tribal. I think we have a task to try and bring people together actually and to seek unity. And it's one of my filters that if there's something to be said, if I think it's going to cause more division, I'm not going to say it. I want to be the person that is blessed because I'm a peacemaker. I want to be bringing people together and seeking the good of those around us. So Galatians 6:10, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. And I'm very cautious about some of the politics that we see at the moment that seems to be more divisive than ever, when the hallmark of the kingdom is one of love and unity, is one of bringing people together. I know there's questions in that around what it means to be truthful, to stand up for truth, but I still think that can be done in a kind manner and in a way that brings people together. Okay, that's a thought to be considered. Point two, seek justice and righteousness. Um, the reason I raise this point is I think I've come to the conclusion that politics on the right and politics on the left is a division of righteousness and justice. That the politics of the right tends to emphasize, on one level, righteousness, right and wrong, and politics on the left seeks justice. Um, Not completely. Those on the right wouldn't say they don't seek justice, or those on the left wouldn't say they necessarily don't seek righteousness. But in my mind, I've come to view these two things are what divides politics. The only person I can see that holds these things together is God. He seems to be the only one that does righteousness and justice correctly. The rest of the time, I think we're trying to work out how to do this. And something about these huge topics that we find difficult to hold in a healthy tension at the same time. For God, it says that righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. It seems to be that only God can hold these things together really well. Now, you might disagree with this analogy, but what it helps me do is appreciate the other argument. For example, if I'm sitting on the left in a certain argument, and I can see something coming from what I would perceive to be the right, I think, hang on a second. I can see that they're trying to uphold a form of righteousness, and in that, I believe there's some good. I want to try and bring justice into that as well. It certainly helps me appreciate those on different sides of the argument, and perhaps I can see it as a justice and righteousness question. It shouldn't be either or, it should be both. I think my point is that we as humans never do both very well. We tend to lurch to one or the other. And finally, seeking discernment. We're familiar with the sons of Issachar, the men of Issachar, who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. I think perhaps a better point three might have been seek the Lord where he may be found. I think everything we do should be done with a sense of prayer. Lord, what's really going on here? Why is this happening? Why is everyone getting upset by this? What's below the surface that is causing this angst? And Lord, help me be the sort of person that can speak into that rather than necessarily what is being presented at face value. So seek consolation, seek justice and righteousness, seek discernment.